Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, excuse me. It is Friday, March 28th, and if you think you are at House General and Housing, you are at the right place. We have a bunch of bills, one of which we're going to hear, and five of which we are going to have their authors come and introduce them to us. Our first bill, which we're going to commence hearing, is H 169, which is an act relating to amending the prohibitions against discrimination in public accommodations and housing. And this is a bill that's going to require, it's a complicated bill, an interesting bill that's going to require a considerable amount of testimony. And so what we're doing is we're commencing testimony today and then continue probably next week, but for as long as it takes for us to hear what we want to hear and address what we want to address and get to the bottom of almost as all of the issues if we can. Our first witness will be Chris Donnelly, who has been here before. He's the Director of Community Relations at Champlain Housing Trust. Chris, welcome. And I believe you know extremely well everyone in this room.
I don't know, but extremely well. Well enough.
Well enough.
You know
Well
our
enough.
faces well
Okay.
enough.
So Chris, tell us who you are for the record and talk to us.
Chris Donnelly, the Director of Community Relations for the Champlain Housing Trust. Thanks. It is nice to be back here with you. I'm going to start out by just letting you know that this is a bill that we feel commits the state to more inclusivity, and as an organization, we're committed to that as well. It doesn't matter who you are or where you're from, what you believe or what your abilities are. We want our programs to serve you, and so in that spirit is why I'm here today. The bill itself, if you think about it in two different parts. I'm going to start with the second part first because I think it's a little bit straightforward. It just adds citizenship and immigration status to a series of pieces of statute in the protected classes, and we're supportive of that. We don't ask that information on our applications, or we don't discriminate based on those criteria. There is an important disclaimer at the bottom is if we are receiving federal funds that require that we ask that, we will. So we don't want the state to pitch us and look at run afoul of federal statute. And we do access some federal funds for some of our housing programs that require that. The first section of the bill, I don't know if it's the first section exactly, but the first part of the bill is the one that gave us originally the most heartburn, to be honest. When I first read this, my initial reaction was, wait a second, we have to ask for Social Security number. This is a part of the bill that prohibits the ability of landlords or property owners to ask for a Social Security number on an application for the purpose of doing a credit check or background check. I think you've had a walkthrough through the bill a little while ago. So, my first reaction was, well, we need that to do a credit check, and if we can't do a credit check, then how do we know the applicant to our rental housing is going to be able to pay the rent? And so that's an important thing that we check. We look back 6 months when we look at applications. We don't think about medical debt. We don't think about student loans. We just see if people are past due more than $1,500 in the last 6 months. And that's what we check. When we do that, if we say, actually, you've got some credit history that makes us concerned, we offer, as a mission-based organization, we offer some support to help people build back their credit. And if they're doing that, then we will offer housing for them. In general, it takes 14 months from the time that someone fills out an application or pre-application with us to the time we have an apartment available. for that. So this is a long process, and in that time, we offer people an opportunity to build a credit if that's an issue. So I'll just start out by saying our first initial reaction was like, wait a second, this doesn't work for us. We got pushed by advocates, and we looked into it deeper, and we found out that we can actually get this very similar amount of information without using a social security number. That we can get that information using date of birth, name, previous address. And so we would be able to work around not collecting that information, with also the caveat that this section also should say that we're not going to run afoul of federal statutes. So we want to have additional language added if you were to pursue this bill to make sure that we weren't running afoul of federal law. And I think that's the language you have.
Yes, this is the language that was proposed and kind of negotiated as kind of makes sense. It keeps the prohibitions clear, and then the notwithstanding. Your favorite word.
So that's the, I mean, that's a pretty simple approach. I think we would just change our applications. So if it was part of a program that people had, we had to access these kind of federal vouchers or what have you for the property, we would say we do need to have a social security number for that, because we have to ensure that we're not running afoul of the law. Otherwise, we could modify our applications and modify our processes to not collect social security numbers.
Okay, questions, please, Joe, and then Debbie.
Thank you. You said that you actually are able to get all credit check information without it. Is that going through like another service?
Yes, yeah, so we have we work with a property management software, and we ask them to do this check for us, regardless of how we do it.
Is there a cost to using a different service?
We have, it's not, I don't think it's I'd have to double check, but the service that we use is for our software. And so it may be connected to that software contract, but I'd have to check. We have a couple hundred applications a month, so we.
Yeah. And then would that be, for your organization, is that something that's readily available to all renters of housing?
To landlords, you mean?
Yes.
I think, I mean, it's a commercial piece of software. It's from a company called RealPage.
It's called what?
RealPage.
Oh, okay, I've heard of that, yeah.
What is, just to elaborate,
Yeah.
what is RealPage?
It's a software company that helps with property management. And so when rent comes in, we enter in, rent is paid. You know, and for us, it has some benefit, the various compliance programs that we use, the federal programs that we use. So it's a software in the cloud that we manage our properties from.
Debbie, you have a question?
Well, when I read this, you're talking about social security numbers just for applying, right?
Correct.
So, I mean, once the lease is signed, you're gonna need a social security number.
I don't see.
Because of the Servicemen Civil Relief Act,
I don't,
which is a federal program.
yeah, I don't, that's not ringing a bell for me, but you can
So
enlighten me.
okay, it was put in place because like, military might be deployed.
Mhm.
And so when they're deployed at that time, you cannot bring a civil suit against them. So they have a database that you can go to, and you need a social security number, you put that in, and then it will run a report. So if ever you have to go to court, for civil court, the judge is going to look for that information.
In other
That
words, if you're in court because of
for any reason, if you're in civil court for any reason, you have to prove that this person has not been employed by the military.
Okay, I think you'd have to find someone a little smarter about this than I am. That has not been, we have tenants that have, we don't require that people give us their social security number. There's a box on our application. If they don't fill it out, we don't require it to be able to rent to them. So, this is a new one.
You're just not going to civil court.
Well, it could be, yeah.
As to get the tenant out.
Well, yeah, if you're looking at landlord stuff, if you had to go to, do an eviction for any reason, you would have to have that information for the judge.
Well, we will, I think, be taking testimony on.
Okay.
Any other questions? Yes.
When I had asked our property manager if you can get a background and credit worthiness
Mhm.
check, they said yes, without a social security number. However, it takes much longer. So is there any time frame?
I wasn't told that there was a longer wait to
Okay.
get it. That's not, I didn't ask that specific question, but I was not told that it would take, it wasn't offered to me.
Other questions? Yes, Elizabeth.
So now that you know you can do it, have you tried it out?
No, we haven't, but we asked the software company if we would get different results, and they said that they didn't think so.
Thank you.
I'm assuming RealPage has probably a scale of subscription fees. Somebody with a couple of units probably might not pay the same as you.
And it may not
It's
be
not real
worthwhile.
obvious on their
Right.
website. I can't find it. So
Yeah.
that isn't intimidating.
RealPage has a whole series of different products available. Some of which I think have been called out as a little nefarious. Some people have a price fixing in some areas.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah.
That's where I'd heard of it.
Yes.
So with what Debbie said about needing the social security number if you're a landlord, doesn't that create a problem?
We'll take testimony on that. What Debbie's referring to is a federal law, which requires that as a condition of being able to file a civil action against someone, you need to determine whether they're in the military. And in the website, Debbie is saying, the website by which one does that, the way you find out is you enter their social security number. And we will take testimony on that. Any other questions? A thought, which is, yes, go
Oh,
ahead.
no, I just wanted to thank you for that extra digging, and I think that we need to hear, from obviously all the voices out there who are in the position of being landlords and the smaller landlords. It's really helpful to hear how one of our biggest landlords that is dealing with people who are struggling to pay and may or may not have, the credit history that you are working. So, it just makes me happy that our housing committee can count on the work that you guys are doing. And my only question is the subscription, so if RealPage is sort of a property management software company, are they relying on Experian and True, what's it called?
TransUnion and
TransUnion.
Equifax. Yeah.
Okay, and so they say that even relying on those companies, they can somehow, is there like a workaround for, like, I wonder how they were able to come to that conclusion that they were that you would still be able to get. I think that you're, did I hear you when you said that the software service can give us what we need
Yeah, with name, date of birth, or
Name,
in
date of birth,
last address.
and addresses? Okay.
The more addresses we have, more history of addresses, the more accurate, more likely to be, get a better hit.
Which presumably means that software can with TransUnion and all the credit companies, et cetera, Equifax, without social security number. It does occur to me, just as a suggestion, given that we're not acting today or instantly, that you might have one more conversation. Is it your property manager who you made
Yeah, we have a compliance department.
the compliance
Right.
department? You might want to go into it a little further and maybe even try once. And let us know if you find out anything that changes your testimony.
Okay.
But it sounds like you.
We asked them.
All right, but it sounds like you have done it before without a social security. It's just, or no, you always.
No, we.
Oh, you've never, okay, yeah.
We just don't ask for.
Oh, okay, I thought for some reason I heard you say that.
No,
You had.
We asked them if we would get different information and they said no. So,
I ask only because we've heard anecdotally sometimes, some people have said that you get more no response. In other words, that the response, you get less complete information, but I'm not saying we know that. It's just something be interesting if you tried it.
Yep.
Joe,
I just looking into this, and it seems others already have, but it seems like an odd road to go down for a company who's having attorney generals across the country bring lawsuits against them. Real page.
it's an odd, I didn't catch the,
Well, I just looked up Real Page and it's, I mean,
they're being litigated.
the
Yeah,
attorney general of
yeah.
Arizona says like,
Yeah.
A lot of
you need to
issues.
continue on with it. It was brought last fall.
Yeah.
It just seems like
So they-
a road to go down.
for us to be using.
Anyone in the
Anyone
state,
to-
honest with you, by,
Um,
sounds like.
So the lawsuits that, as far as I know, the lawsuits that are, have been filed have to do with the fact that they've been colluding, they've had some collusion to set rents at a higher rate than market. So they're like increasing the rents based on the information that they're collecting from landlords. Our information is not, our rents are set by statute or set by regulation. So we can't be engaged in a price fixing
That's what the company in general.
company in general.
Agreed.
Read my mind.
You haven't reconsidered using them because of this litigation.
I'm not sure if we have or not, but
Okay.
And it's not connected to this bill.
No.
No, I mean, if it was some other company that didn't have this, I wouldn't be making that point at all.
there are other companies that provide this kind of software, so.
Any final questions? Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Very much.
Angela? So Angela Zakowski is director of the Vermont Landlord Association and also an attorney who practices in the field and
Yes,
has been helpful to the legislative committee on landlord tenant issues in the past. Angela?
Thank you for that introduction. I first want to start with this bill, section 1. So I am an attorney. I've been an attorney since 2003, so coming up on 22 years here. I regularly read statutes and legislative bills. And I will say my first read of section 1, I read this bill as the landlord can't take a social security number, they can't run a credit check, and they can't run a criminal background check. So I will say, I think there's some language issues in section 1, because if I read this bill as prohibiting all 3 of those things, other people will as well. And I'm not sure that's the committee's intent here, given what I'm hearing around the table for questions. I will further say that even if it's redrafted, a prohibition on a collection of a social security number by a landlord for doing these background checks, my organization cannot support. The company that we have a relationship with and offer to our members to run credit checks requires a social security number. Appfolio, which is one of the big Appfolio, which is one of the big property management platforms out there, requires a social security number. Nonprofit housing providers that I work with that are not Champlain Housing Trust that I checked in with about this issue need a social security number to run a credit check. Social security numbers are a unique identifier for a person. I would have a lot of concerns with data that was being supplied that was with a person's name, address, and date of birth. You are not going to get a good report. You are not going to get a potentially accurate report. You are not going to get a full report because the only way to match that person with their actual credit history is with that social security number. That's partially why companies use those when they're reporting credit. So they know that they're providing accurate information for the correct person. I think, we want housing providers to be able to have an accurate report and be making decisions based on accurate information. And my concern is that they are not able to collect that social security number to run a credit report. They're going to be making decisions on not accurate information or half information. Many of the online platforms that folks are using, like AppFolio, the tenant fills in the information themselves. So the landlord may not actually even see the full social security number if it's a safety issue or a privacy issue or a concern of people's sensitive personal information. So the tenant puts it in, and then if the landlord sees it, a lot of times it's what we call masked, which means you're only seeing the last 4 digits. But the system requires that to be able to run the full accurate report. I am not aware of any programs that my folks have access to where they can run a credit report without a social security number.
What happens if I'm a foreign national, I have a passport?
Yep. There are, from what I understand, you can get a TIN, like a identification number that works similarly. You're probably going to show as having no credit, right? Because credit here is built by having accounts, having a credit card, having a mortgage, having a car payment, things of that nature. There are landlords and housing providers who work with folks that are coming in from overseas that maybe don't have the history here, and they have other screening protocols that they put into place because they know they're not going to get a hit with a social security number. They're not going to get a credit report. But to sort of outright ban it for the rest of the landlord and housing provider community, I think is going to create more challenges. It's going to create an issue with accuracy with our information. And it's also going to potentially cause problems or cause landlords to make decisions that maybe will exclude some folks because they can't get access to that information. Landlords want to make sure people are going to pay the rent. One of the ways they do that is by seeing if people pay their bills. Landlords, in my experience, because I also deal with sort of the other side, which is when people aren't paying and we have to go to court, landlords are the last on the list that get paid. So if somebody's not paying other credit cards, they're not paying car payments, they're not paying utilities, it's also very likely a landlord's not going to get paid.
Do you have a question?
I did.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I was just curious, in similar situations, so all of this aside about people who are not from the US, but if it is someone from the US, let's say a survivor of sexual domestic violence who is being relocated, their identity, they don't have a social security number because their identity is being protected. I used to work for a sexual domestic violence agency, so I've seen the situation happen, and people can't house them because of that. So this, in effect, would help someone in that situation. And given the current state of things and the increasing rise of our society, I'm curious as to how do you see another solution for ways to address the Social Security issue? Because it's bigger than more than Social Security number. It's not just people who are coming from other countries. And so in your experience, have you ever worked in a situation where you've had someone who's not from another country who does not have a Social Security number and needed to get services? does any of your consumers have that experience?
No,
Okay.
the only folks that I've interfaced with who don't have social security numbers are people who have not been in the country very long or who are not US citizens who are here, maybe working on a work visa but many of them have a tax ID number, right? They pay taxes or they have to have some way of identifying themselves. I was not aware that there's a situation where you don't have a social security number because you're a victim of domestic violence.
When you're changing your identity,
Okay.
yeah, fleeing domestic violence, that's a situation that happens in our state.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think that has a name, I forget. what it's called.
I want to go back over things here. I understand what you're saying, that the software, or the various pieces of software that you're available with, including AppFolio, but maybe others as well, require a social security number, okay? And you think that the information that one would get without it would not be accurate or complete. What makes, is it yes or no? Either you can or you can't, or is there?
So when we're talking about credit and credit reporting, the social security number is a unique identifier, right? We all have different numbers that are from each other that are attached to our person. I guess that sounds really weird, but that's essentially what happens. And so regardless of, what my name might be or where I've lived, or if there's a mistake with my date of birth, that social security number attaches to me and to my credit, right? So in order to take out that would require extending credit, or even, I think these days, opening a utility account requires a social security number, right? So it links back to me as the person. An address may or may not, is only as good as sort of the data. Name may or may not, right? So social security, Zykowski is my married name, is not my maiden name. So if you were to run Zykowski for me with an address, you're only going to get those things from the Zykowski era, not anything before that. Social security number, you're going to get all of it because it's all going to be there. So it's only as good as the data. Same with date of birth. It's not as clean. And I think you're not going to get as accurate of information.
Please, Elizabeth.
Why would you ever need to run a person's social security all the way back?
It was an example, right? So
I mean,
if
is that normal for you to,
Yeah, Chris testified he went back 6 months. What's typical in your experience?
a couple of years. So, I mean, I've been married a long time, so that's probably not going to apply. But if I had just gotten married and had just recently changed my name, that social security number is going to attach to both names and the data from both names because I'm still the same person. I just, last name was changed. But if you just ran the name that I have now, you're just going to get the data for that name.
Yes.
And I think right now, we're really talking about credit, but what about, so background for me is once upon a time, I worked for a property management company. And for some, God knows why, had me run all of the background and credit checks. I think with a background, when you run a background, you don't say, I just want to look at a background for the last 3 years. It gives you everything.
I think credit reports have 6 or 7 years of data on them. Yep.
But a background is usually
Everything.
your background. And I think that,
what do you need a life history background for
I think it's really important if you have somebody living in your home or your building. I mean, a DUI 10 years ago is very different than a physical assault. Gun charges, like there is
somebody on the lifetime sex offender registry.
Yeah.
Do you have any opinions on what approach one might, I mean, one might take if one doesn't have a social security.
I think there's a lot more legwork and investigative work by the landlord to sort of try to seek all of the same types of information about ability to pay, history. I think it's a slightly different inquiry if it's somebody who's coming from another country who doesn't have that data or isn't going to have that history here. Many times they're coming because they're employed or, they get references from their employer or other folks who they're connected with here. But it does add time to the process. It definitely is more sort of legwork. And I think, there's ways through it. I think to ask housing providers to do that for every single applicant that's applying would be a huge burden.
Do you think, I mean, I have no opinion on this, I'm just raising it because it occurs to me. It's one thing to say landlords cannot ask for a social security number. It might be another to say they can't require it in the sense of, in other words, actually, that's the wrong way for me to get discussion. Forget the language issue. That's my natural tendency is to go to language. If you were able to say in a situation, what's your social security number? And then if someone says, I don't have a social security number, then if the landlord then had alternative ways of doing it, they wouldn't maybe have to do it for everybody. In other words, your concern is that's a lot of extra legwork. If we have a blanket prohibition on social security, it means they have to do that extra legwork for everybody.
Right.
I realize, of course, that might make it easier to discriminate on those grounds. I realize. I'm just asking.
Right. I mean, I think
Your thoughts, Angela, that's all.
Exactly. I think what you're getting at is really what we're talking about is the lack of a social security number is not a basis to deny an application. Right? I think that's what I'm hearing around. So it's not saying landlords, you cannot take a social security number. It's saying if you don't have, the applicant doesn't have a social security number, you can't deny them because they don't have one.
Yeah.
To find another way. I think that's really what we're talking about here, isn't it?
And how do you feel about that?
I feel less upset about that.
I'm less upset.
I will also follow up and say, of course, it depends on how it's drafted.
Yeah.
Because I think as we're seeing here, words are important and how they're put on the paper is also important. So pending how it would be on the paper, perhaps, but as a concept, definitely less upset about that.
All right.
Okay. Right.
I would just say, as a landlord, you want to know as much as you can about the person that's applying, because you may have many different types of housing situations where you could take this person, it's like that person would work in this house. Like we could do that, meet their needs in this house, in this housing that we have, or, so I mean, I feel like it's to the advantage of the tenant to supply information, and then we can say, I mean, even, criminal background checks. I think the pedophiles fit in that category.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, so, we might have some housing that's away from kids and somebody actually watches them and stuff, will report to us, but it's like, they could work there. They could be in that house.
Angela, I think, I'm not sure, but I imagine there might be a subsequent draft. If there is, would you mind reviewing it and letting us know, perhaps in writing or via an email or a telephone call with the sponsor, what your thoughts are? That would be much appreciated.
Absolutely. Happy to do that. I do want to just weigh in real quick on the rest of the sections. So sections 2 through 4, which are adding citizenship and immigration status to the list of protected classes. For the organization, we do not have an issue or an opinion with the citizenship version. I think that's, works in sort of the confines of this. We do have some concerns about immigration status, and most of that relates to federal law, and, being asked for housing providers to have to take somebody regardless of what their immigration status is, with some potential risk to the housing provider for doing so. I think housing providers should be able to make their own choice about whether they want to take risk on in that situation. But it should not be forced on them by the state or put them in a position where they have to choose between violating potentially federal law in some situations or violating fair housing law in Vermont.
Just to clarify, I'm just trying to get clarity here. Your concern is that kind of a landlord would be caught in between an obligation in state legislation versus a federal law that would say, are there federal laws that say you can't rent without verifying citizenship or something?
Immigration status, if somebody is not here legally, they are technically in violation of federal law. We all can have our own personal opinions about that
Yeah,
situation.
yeah.
And immigration is very challenging and
Right.
has a lot of issues, and may personally disagree with what those
Sure.
rules are, but those are the rules. And so to make a landlord have to take somebody, even if they're not here legally, I think is a challenge and a big ask.
Are you aware of any prosecutions that have occurred or anything that's occurred of any legal nature on that basis by the feds?
I think anything is possible at this point.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Do we have any historical?
Yeah, historical.
No, but
Yeah, I don't know.
There's actually one down south. And I can look into that more.
I mean, the closest analogy we have is federal forfeiture laws for drug activity. So federal government does have the right to take property if it's being used for illegal drugs.
And
And there were actually a few properties in Rutland that had that happen to. It's very rare,
I
but
mean, it was properties related to marijuana cultivation that was legal here, but they,
no, it's, those properties were big messes. There was all kinds of stuff going on there.
yeah.
Right.
And did the landlords know that this was happening?
I think that was part of the problem. Those specific properties in Rutland, I don't think they could figure out who owned them and what was happening. And the property manager was involved in the activities as a property. So, I mean, I think you could argue, yes, maybe the landlord did know. But I think, federal forfeiture doesn't happen very often. It does happen in those situations. But I think the concern is that we are in an entirely different climate right now. And who knows?
Yes, it's
Sorry.
anybody.
No, I just wanted to get back to the,
Okay.
so what was that the section or there's still more?
No, that was,
Those two.
I just wanted to make sure I touched on 2 to 4.
And if you could, I don't know already, I didn't have, but if you could provide us with those comments or concerns, like kind of we can have it in front of us. That's possible?
For all of the stuff I've talked about today.
I mean, it would just,
Even a bullet list.
sometimes, I can't always, as we're reviewing things, remember everything that was said.
Just a bulleted list.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful that we could look at that so that as we're, the bill and getting more testimony, we have that in front of us.
Yeah, Gail, did you have a
I'm
question?
not sure this is a question for this person giving testimony, but I wanted to know if there was a difference between undocumented and illegal.
I don't know if that's.
Yeah,
There is.
I mean, that's how you wanna
I'll tell you what.
split it, but you can just not have the information
It
to
is.
provide, but you just.
Let's let this witness go.
Would you like me to wait till the revised language comes
I mean,
out?
If
I
we're,
would love to have revised, like a
That's fine.
suggested
Okay.
revision, because I don't want to produce something that doesn't meet what you're looking for or, you
Yeah,
know,
as
to
long
consider
as
at all.
have it in their brain.
Yeah, so I get,
If you
I've
so
gotten
choose.
the
If you so
immigration stuff.
choose.
Yeah, of course.
A rewritten I think we know what you're saying about section 2 and 3, and so you don't have to do that.
Okay.
If you have explicit language on section 1 that would be acceptable, we'd like to see it.
Sure.
Okay. Any other questions? Well, thank you. Appreciate your time. Thank you for coming here.
Of course.
All right, so that's the end of our testimony on this bill
For
today. And we will be hearing from numerous other witnesses on this issue. And
Next,
so
Lolly and Rebecca.
our next
They're not scheduled for until 2:10.
two
Oh,
tests.
that's not
So,
good.
yeah, we are at this point.
I was told to schedule.
No, it's not you, it's not you. I'm
You're not
just,
feeling less bad about that.
yeah, 20 minutes.
So
On a Friday, it's like
I
an
think at this
eternity.
moment, what we're going to do is come back here at 2:10, which is 30 minutes from now, in order to commence hearing introductions of bill. Our first bill will be introduced by Representative Supernon, and that will be at 2. Actually, no, I'm sorry. No, Rebecca Holcomb and Kate Lally will be
Right.
here at 2:10. So little less than half an hour.